It's 8:35. Monday morning. What are you doing at 8:30 on Monday morning? This is the Oneness Talking Point with Melanie Brockwell. It is strange saying your own name. It feels weird. This was actually meant to be a monthly broadcast, and it's turned into a weekly thing without any, real conscious decision being made about that. And I wondered this morning about making it a monthly broadcast. Not in any sense that my life's too busy or I don't want to fit it in. I'm just kind of following those instructions and sharing what it feels like to have, to receive those instructions. And then the difference between getting that information, processing that information, and what it is that you actually do, the actions you take, the so-called actions you take, and the choices that you make, and understanding that none of that really has anything to do with each other in the way that it makes sense to us in our perception. So my instructions may be about feeling frustrated and going for a walk, but the thing that's going on, the all that is story, just needs me to have those feelings and just needs me to go for a walk, and doesn't have any narrative where that's the only truth that's going on. There are a lot of explanations on the planet that take for granted that the information we get is the only truth that's going on. And there's something in that for me that I question. It doesn't feel enough. It feels like there is a mystery, even in our certainty that there is a mystery. It feels like there's always more going on than we can possibly understand. And there's all kinds of everyday life nuances to that. I've got some friends doing some biofield tuning sessions at the moment. I spoke about them last week. And there's, a sense in my cosmology that without a direct linear cause and effect, there's no way for me to give them feedback or even to understand in my head that they are doing something to or for me which is having this effect. That kind of leapfrog, pebble in the pond story doesn't work for me. And it's not that I don't think anything is going on. It's that I accept there is more going on than we can quantify, that we can fathom. I love that word, fathom, to measure. And so I am grateful for the time and energy and expertise and love and focus and attention that it takes for them to perform what they understand as the biofield tuning process. And at the same time, my experience of it, it's like for those of us who can see auras, right? We can walk into a room and the picture of the world includes this information. Yeah. Whereas somebody else who doesn't walks into the room and all of their explanations are based on the information that's included in their reality. So all of the reasons for that person standing over there in that posture and wearing those clothes and having the relationship that they have with their family and wanting the things that they want are based on some socio-economic psychology story of how the world works. And then the person who can see auras might have that too, but in addition to that, they have all of this other information that kind of gets fed into that story. It's like that for me, except there is so much information. It's not just the addition of auras. You know, I do have a founding understanding of socioeconomic and psychological and political and historical and religious concepts and explanations for what's going on. But I also understand those explanations end at a point where I can see more to the story. Not that I've got the book of history and then I've got the book of the other things that I have access to and they sit next to each other on the shelf. It's not a building of library. It's the information that's in the history book has extra pages because there's more going on in the one story that we're telling. For me, the way that I perceive, experience, need to be who I am. And so in the biofield tuning session, I can see what the practitioners can see, and I can accept how they understand what's going on. And I can see more pages to that story, more pages to the sense of that person is an other with a skin and flesh that ends here, with a relationship to the other practitioner, to the relationship to the person that taught them, that they learnt from, with a relationship to the people they work with and the instruments that they have and the, you know, the universe of information that they have access to, which also comes into play while they're doing that session. And then I have access to information that's more and more and more and more pages. And there's this sense of wholeness for me that expands to the edges of no edges of oneness. And so the feedback and the explanation of what's going on includes a gratitude without requiring a give and take process, without requiring a receiving of healing explanation, without requiring a symptom relief story, without even requiring an other and self dynamic. And as much as, you know, there's part of me that goes, why are we talking about me? It's not necessarily about how I perceive the world. You know, these conversations aren't meant to be an insight or a confession about the oneness that makes sense to me in any kind of comparison. You know, it's like, it's more about that inclusiveness. And then in that inclusiveness, you know, allowing you to have a sense of, well, mine's different, so that you can become more familiar with what your sense of whatever the topic is. And so the topic is wholeness. And I wasn't sure I was going to do the show this morning. And I don't need to make a decision until I need to make a decision. And so that uncertainty was just allowed to be uncertainty until it wasn't. And within the instructions of that uncertainty, I was led to watch this show on Netflix called Continuum. Just some, you know, time traveling terrorist show about corporations and society and whatnot. But what happened while I was, you know, pottering around, I was working on some YouTube images while that was playing in the background, and there was something that came to me relevant to that topic of wholeness. And it's that sense that for me, the good and bad is allowed to fall away when I understand that the same things that I love about a system exist in the same reality as the things that I don't love. You know, the things that I don't understand, really, is what it comes down to. The things that I'm curious about where I'm meant to put them in my sphere of awareness. The things I'm curious about how social systems want to be engaging with them. So I guess it's the usual suspects, you know, violence and starvation, international politics. Those things I accept as part of the wholeness, not just of some small social sphere like Australia, but of all that is, you know, the wholeness of all that is can't be divided up into nationhoods. It can include the story of nationhoods. It can include the experiences of people and the cosmologies that do divide wholeness into nationhoods, into macrocosms and microcosms, you know, who want to see some kind of reflection between above and below and divide the world into before and after. And, you know, I think that was one of the questions that came in for people, just in a sense of self-awareness, is like even that sense of the rule of law as an evolution from an autocracy or any other system that wasn't based on a rule of law, you know, a clan system or whatever it is. So even in that socioeconomic story of the system that's in place at the moment, with the pieces that people love and the pieces that people want to change, understanding and acknowledging that the things that people want to change, say, I don't know, corporate greed or whatever, they are an evolution of the social changes that you celebrate. And so along with the social changes that you celebrate came all of the things that you don't. And there's something in the recognition of that wholeness. There's something, it's not asking you to accept it all and love it all and live with it and not feel inspired by it. It's more like the child that behaves in a way that you don't understand, the child that behaves in a way that you think makes your life difficult, that won't sit in their chair or, can't keep their hands to themselves or won't be quiet or whatever it is. The child that then grows into the person that needs all of those characteristics, all of those abilities that you see as deficiencies, all of those abilities that you see as behavioral issues. The child that grows into the person that utilizes and acknowledges and has experiences from all of those abilities has been valuable the whole time. The value doesn't come from social recognition. The value doesn't come even from their own awareness of their value. The value doesn't come from some story about how they did for others. The value is inherent. It doesn't have to be expressed or reflected or seen or acknowledged in order to be valuable. In oneness, in the story of evolution, where you have to use something in order for it to be worthwhile, or recognize something in order for it to experience love, or, do something positive with it in order for it to be a force of change. That's a different version, that's a different cosmology, which is equally valuable. The people that are having that story, that experience, their sense of wholeness is divided. Their sense of wholeness is yet to come. Their sense of wholeness is, about punishment and reward and suffering and relief and exchange, and giving and receiving and being in flow here and not in flow there. And that is the experience that spirit wants to have. That's, as far as where I'm coming from, there's nothing about that I would change or admonish, or admire. It's equally sacred to all of the other cosmologies from oneness. And so I guess the posing of that question, just in that self-awareness for people who do see evolution, is, how do you perceive the wholeness of that evolution that brought the changes that you celebrate, as well as the conditions that you condemn and want to change, that give you a sense of motivation and injustice? How do you perceive them? I'm not trying to lead you anywhere there. I'm not trying to resolve anything for you. It's more about what is the truth for you in that story. How does that fit into your world? I often have clients that feel strongly about many political issues, environmental issues, social issues, human rights issues. And the overwhelm of that passion and concern is what they come to me to talk about. And I guess they seek a resolution. They seek some peace to be able to fight the good fight in order to move towards a world where they don't lose sleep, worrying about the children that have no food and the women that are unsafe and the men that are being exploited. They want to be able to do the work and not be crushed by the realities of seeing and being aware of what it is they do the work for, what it is they want to change. The details of that are crushing. And I think those clients often come to me realizing that the main reason that it makes sense to them to seek help in there, not to be crushed, is because the work that needs to be done from compassion, from love and understanding. And if it's a fight and a battle and an opposition and a condemnation and an injustice, there's no compassion. There's no love. There's no empathy. It's a brutal and violent act. And it becomes difficult to reconcile for that person that believes that they're working toward a world of peace to realize that their modus operandi is violence. And that may not be true for you. I just think it must be coming up as part of the conversation for a reason. Where does that fit in your story? What is your modus operandi? How do you operate? What kind of change agent are you, if you are a change agent? Do you see victims and perpetrators? And if you see victims and perpetrators, how are you encountering perpetrators? Are you asking what is it that they need? Are you asking what kind of conditions created a reality where they do what they do? Are you asking what's the next step for them to come to a point where they feel loved and accepted and worthwhile and valuable and included? Or are you asking some other questions? What other questions are you asking about those people who have been labeled perpetrators, the ones responsible for making the political decisions that you condemn, for committing the violent acts that you condemn, for failing to act in ways that are equally responsible for the things that you condemn? And you know the rest of the story. I don't need to list them all for you to be aware of that, because that's part of the wholeness. Having all your cards on the table, knowing exactly what it is that you're doing. And I don't think there's anything to condemn, you know, from where I'm standing. If you discover that you're a violent agent of change, then you must be that for a reason. You know what? The question I would ask is, I was going to say, what kind of conditions would, you know, what kind of context would lead to that situation? But even then, I don't even question who it is that you are. So it would only be that question if you came to me wondering, or if someone in relationship with you didn't understand what was going on and wanted to know from a perspective of oneness and acceptance and wholeness. Then I would ask about the context, what I call the natural explanation, which means all of the things that you are have a natural explanation. At no point did you make a mistake, or was, you know, there a corruption of divine energy, or, you know, whatever, however you want to explain that. In the natural explanation, we are all operating on the same principles, the principles that make sense to us. Why do the things that make sense to us make sense to us is the question that I would ask. But only really if somebody else wanted to understand. It's not in my nature to want to explain you. I'm just trying to think how to articulate what that means. It's I guess because I don't see you as an other, so there's this sense of not ever making it about you. The whole of my reality is a cosmic conversation, and so the wholeness of this moment is all there is. Even standing in line or dealing with the tax department or whatever. And there are still real feelings and stories and all of that stuff. Because in the wholeness of what is, that's what I'm being asked to have. You know, or that's what spirit has the appearance of me is being led to explore. So what, you know, if you were just an experience that spirit is having. What would wholeness mean for you? What would the argument with the neighbor or the internet going down or mortgage payments not going through or starvation, violence, political greed, all of those things that you condemn, what would all of those things be if in the wholeness you were just an experience that spirit is having? And I don't want to convert you to that concept. I just think there's something in the playing of those games, like the brain in the vat. I don't know if you've ever done any consciousness studies, but one of the scenarios that you get to play with is, what if you were just a brain in a vat and all of the experiences you think you're having aren't connected to a form at all? How would you know? Because ultimately, even with the so-called understanding that we have, our experience is mediated by senses, and those senses don't actually have a perception. They have a translation of information, of data. So you don't actually see or hear or taste or feel. All of that is mediated. All of that is data that's translated. So even the fact that we think we know that information is gained through an experience of scientific testing, which can only be done by a mediated perception of data that isn't actually picking up or perceiving what is. I think that's what allows me to metaphorically step back. When people say, yes, but I'm definitely in a body, I can feel it, and here I am, and I'm watching you on the phone or the iPad, and you're over there talking, and if I slapped you in the face, you would definitely feel it. But those things don't hold any proof of life, of physicality. And even the scientific investigation of physics will tell you there's no difference between solid and non-solid. It's an experience mediated by the perception of time, mediated by the perception of atomic structure, subatomic activity. So even if you want to take for granted that there are things that you're perceiving, even when you go down that road, there's still information that says we don't really know. We can't, it feels like, looks like, seems like, but all the tests tell us that it ain't so. I think that's where that preconception I have of mystery seems to get laid out in the research in the world that I encounter. You can say that's my perceptual bias, and I'm willing to accept that. And I'm also willing to take that further and say perceptual bias is a function of spirit having the experience that seems like me. So even then, that perceptual bias is not a limitation. You know, that inability to know what is a function of oneness, is a function of wholeness, is a function of spirit, whatever you want to label it. I'm completely in surrender to that concept. I think it's very comforting that I cannot know, that I don't even actually exist as a thing that carries through time with a form. You know, I even have memories of that not being true. And it's funny because I was talking to someone the other day about that, and I think the question asked was something along the lines of, so when you came in, was it a choice? And I couldn't really think about it, but I sat with it later, and it occurred to me that this concept of space-time is unique. So the memory that I have, even though I call it a memory and we associate memories with the past, the reality of time that, you know, the science of physics has already investigated says it's dynamic. It's a perception. And so this memory I have of being without form doesn't exist in the past. There is no past in other experiences that spirit is having. You know, there's no need for spirit to take up space and say, this is a dimension of time, space, and over here I've created this one, and I've got these two things going at once. That concept is a perception tied to space-time. It doesn't have to exist anywhere else. You know, spirit doesn't have form, doesn't have dimensions. It can have experiences of, you know, explorations of, you know, according to the oneness story. And if you're getting a different story, then go with your story. That's the whole point of this. So whatever your sense of source or, you know, origin, it comes from here and then it projects to there, and here are the layers of illusion, and here are the dimensions of reality, and here is the physics of atoms, and, you know, whatever makes sense to you. That's ultimately what I want you to be getting out of this. I don't want you to follow me or believe me or think like I do. That's inane. But for me, there is no source, there is no origin, because the concept of source and origin is separate, is dependent upon space-time, is dependent upon some creative thing that then creates something else. That's unnecessary in oneness. You know, the oneness that makes sense to me. I mean, I don't even know if that's really what it's called. I might be stepping on the oneness toes of all the people that have oneness of separation. And I don't want to redefine it for those people. It's the closest term I've come to give form in language to how it makes sense to me. This is what I'm being asked to articulate. And it often feels like I'm doing a really crap job. I'm babbling on. And that's equally sacred in my understanding of what is worthwhile. The feelings of not quite knowing, understanding that the next word I'm going to use isn't even here yet. I don't have any sense of where I would pull it from. It's like you're taking steps, but even as you're lifting your foot to take steps, there's no ground beneath you. It's only as your foot comes down to the point where the universe needs there to be ground, is there ground. That's what it feels like. Every single moment of my life feels like the ground hasn't even been perceived of yet. You know, and people will say, "But how do you run a business and pay your bills and have a plan and do the things that people need to do?" You must have some sense of reality that you know where the front door is, and you don't need to. It doesn't have to be that way. There's a big truck out the front. I don't know if you can hear that. Oh. Oh. You know, the child that runs off in the park to discover the trees remembers that they have a mother or a father or a guardian or someone sitting at the playground when they need to remember, and they'll turn around and they'll be there. There's no, the child doesn't need to have that 3D memory constantly playing out that's building up this ticky-tacky picture of the universe that is actually there. You know, and I guess that's still true for me. I still wake up not knowing what I am, let alone where I am. I still read a book and completely forget I'm in a room on a bed. Ooh. Love that. I want to find some Japanese monk toning. You know, they get, my voice doesn't go that low. And they go really low. They're toning. I really like that. You know, and if you need to have a plan and you need to know where everything is and you have a ticky-tacky picture of the universe, then that's what you're meant to have. You know, and in my sense of how the universe works, that would be spirit having the experience it wants to have. It wouldn't be less than. Even if you had the ticky-tacky picture of the universe and you thought you wanted to get rid of it, that would still be part of the equally sacred experience that oneness is having on purpose. I don't really want to end while the truck is still out there. All right, so no homework, just go where you feel to. You know, did you think this was going to be about something in particular? Were you disappointed? What would you have said about wholeness? What did you expect someone to say about wholeness? Did you want a PDF download? What did you write down from today? Just go with the experience that you're having. Even if you don't know what that is and you curse it. I just get this sense that I honor whatever it is that's true for you. I honor however it is the world makes sense for you. I honor you as spirit having an experience. That's my oneness talking point, wholeness message. Message? I don't really have a message. All right, people. I love you lots. I might talk to you next week, or might be a monthly thing. You never know. Keep you on your toes. Okay, ciao for now.